Welcome to Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where we bring evidence, experience, and perspective to make sense of today's leading health challenges. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
This is Lindsay Smith-Rogers, producer of Public Health on Call. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and this year marks the 30th anniversary of the passage of the Violence Against Women Act in Congress. Today, Stephanie Desmond talks to Johns Hopkins gender-based violence experts, Dr. Michele Decker and Dr. Tiara Willie, about how far we have come since 1994 and the solutions still needed 3 decades later. Let's listen.
Michele Decker and Tiara Willie, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's great to have a chance to connect.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks.
So I wanted to talk today about the Violence Against Women Act, which is turning 30 this year. And before we sort of talk about where we're going, I'd really like to know sort of where we came from. What was it like in this space 30 years ago, Michele?
This is an incredible anniversary that we're celebrating this year with the 30 years of the Violence Against Women Act, bringing us back to 1994, really when this came into motion and came into being as a result of an incredible amount of advocacy, I should mention. We really saw a blanket minimization of violence against women in its many forms, whether it was sexual violence, intimate partner violence, which was probably commonly known as domestic violence at that time. These were issues that were seen as happening behind closed doors. They were not necessarily a matter of public concern. And as a result, engagement with law enforcement, access to services was very limited. And a dominant response was really pushing this under the carpet, advising perpetrators to sort of walk around the block and cool off, and overall sort of this minimization of this experience. And when VAWA came on the scene in 1994, thanks to now President Joe Biden, we really saw this incredible response. We saw resources devoted to criminal justice and coordinated community responses for prevention and responding to gender-based violence. And it was a sweeping moment, not only for the resources that it provided, but also elevating this issue to a matter of public concern, which was very much sort of where we were at that moment in time when you look at other major initiatives globally, Beijing being one of them right there in the mid-1990s. So we've come a long way since then, but I do really want to showcase and really affirm how transformational VAWA has been in these 30 years in bringing this to a matter of public attention, public service, public health, as well as certainly on the justice side.
Tiara, what does it do and what doesn't it do?
So one of the things that it does, it gives us like political platform for us to have real conversations about how do we respond and support victims and survivors of gender-based violence, which Michele mentioned is not something that we had 30 years ago. And so that's one of the most powerful things I think about VAWA. I think it also provides opportunity for us to continue to kind of like reform and refine the ways that we do respond to survivors so that we're being culturally responsive to their needs and addressing how interlocking systems can put certain survivors at greater risk for violence.
So, Michele, talk to us about where we're going. We know where we've come from, and where are we going?
Absolutely. One of the most important things that VAWA did again was to put this matter up on the federal agenda and in the public eye. We've seen a lot of gains in the past 30 years, and what we're here to talk about today is this is a persistent matter. VAWA got us really far, and we still have a long ways to go. We continue to see really unacceptable rates of intimate partner violence and sexual violence, particularly against women. There are major racial and ethnic disparities that I know Dr. Willie is going to get into some of the response on that. And we continue to see homicide as a leading cause of death to women, particularly Black and brown women. And what VAWA set us up for is, I think, really this next generation. As of 2023, our new national plan to end gender-based violence takes a multi-pillar approach to this, and it includes and explicitly names prevention. It includes and explicitly names housing and economic opportunities because these are so entrenched in violence against women in this sort of cycle where violence enables risk for economic challenges and housing adversity and homelessness. And then you can see that those very same issues, those very same elements of housing instability, homelessness, economic dependence, then perpetuate and even escalate cycles of abuse. So now with the new plan in place, the new national plan, we have this incredible platform to really finish this work on prevention, survivor support, and access to justice. One of our other challenges in this work is that even with VAWA, even with those supports in place, violence against women remains one of the most underreported crimes. So what does this mean? Survivors are not able to access justice. It means that our police records are limited in their ability to really capture the scope of the problem. So these are important things for us to know even after 30 years of VAWA. What do they tell us? They tell us that prevention really matters. They tell us that supports for survivors really matter. And they tell us that our public health infrastructure is so essential in this. We're never going to be able to rely solely on police records to understand the scope of the problem because we have this hidden element, this underreporting. So our colleagues over at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, our national surveillance systems, the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey that they run so beautifully, these are really essential for us to be able to continue to track the progress that we're making and allow us to monitor pockets and places and populations where we need to be more active and vigilant in the prevention work that we're doing and connecting survivors to services.
Well, how do we prevent this, Michele?
We are so thankful 30 years since VAWA now to have some real threads and learning on violence prevention. Some of this is about identifying and interrupting these cycles early to break that intergenerational transmission, as it's known, and provide supports to families. The evidence now on housing as a solution to interrupt cycles of violence is quite compelling, including some of our work done right here in Baltimore with House of Ruth, Maryland, showing just extraordinary drops in violence prevalence after even 3 months in housing support services. And critically,
meaning that you take people out of the bad situation. Is that correct?
Exactly. Getting people into transitional housing and community-based housing first, or rapid rehousing as it's known, providing that safe housing for people is really a path for them to have that immediate protection, yes, but also to build that economic stability, restore their families, restore their sense of safety, and protect their children as they move into and create a new life as needed. It's important for us to know as well that the economic dependence on abusive partners is actually reduced when we provide housing. Go figure. It makes a lot of sense when we hear it out loud, but it's something that we need to really consider as an important solution to gender-based violence. And it's one that's named actually within the national plan. So looking forward to seeing where we can go by scaling up and making those services ever more accessible, given that the evidence base is really robust in that area.
I understand that you are doing work with missing and murdered Black women and girls, and I wanted you to sort of lay that out for us and what you're learning.
Yeah, it kind of feels like we're learning something new almost every day about the situation, to be honest with you. So one of the things that we've learned recently, and kind of tapping into what Michele is talking about, is trying to understand how what we call structural gendered racism actually influences this kind of pathway to missing and murdered Black women and girls. So we're talking about basically how larger systems and institutions actually reinforce sexism and racism that puts Black women and girls at a greater disadvantage, whether that's in housing, education, employment, those different sectors, which then being disenfranchised in those different areas like housing and unemployment actually leads to greater risk of being missing, being murdered, experiencing partner violence. with a former or current partner. And so that's one of the things that we're kind of learning more about, because once we learn that that was an important relationship that's happening at the system level, we can kind of try to figure out, well, what are those interventions that we can kind of develop from a public health perspective to intervene at that upstream level and not necessarily kind of victim blame or blame Black women and girls for the violence that they're experiencing, which has usually been the narrative over the past several decades, is that like Black women and girls that go missing and eventually murdered are kind of like runaways, or, they're trying to get away from their family. And really what we're finding out is, no, they're in abusive relationships with their partners. They're depending on him for economics, for finances, for housing. He's controlling them through coercive control. But all of this is really because, they're having difficulty getting housing on their own or difficulty getting high-paid employment so they can have more autonomy for themselves. And that really leads back to this like bigger system of structural gender racism.
It's interesting to me that we still have these serious problems, right? I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, well, why is this still okay in some places? Why is this accepted, Tiara?
If we're being honest, it's something that's been deeply rooted in the fabrics of American society. It's hard to kind of erode something that's been at the foundation for so long. We did a podcast recently about missing and murdered Black women and girls, and I got a similar question. And I said the reality of it is that one of the reasons why Black Americans are here is because of being missing and murdered from our original ancestral lands. And so, that's one of the great things about VAWA, because it's now given us this political platform that we can now discuss this really important epidemic without having to kind of keep it within the Black community and keep it silent. We can talk about, this is an issue. What are the real solutions that we can create? But part of it is because it's just so embedded in the foundation of American society. And so it's just going to take a while for us to address that as an issue and to actually get those resources behind it to support erasing this epidemic, like the first office on missing and murdered Black women and girls. That's one of those solutions to this issue.
And I wanted to ask also, Michele, I understand that you have a new NIH award about domestic violence and maternal mortality.
So VAWA got this really onto the federal scene. There were some prior initiatives, but VAWA is the one that people really name and know. And there's often been a sense that, okay, we've got VAWA, we're good, right? We've solved this. And VAWA actually really was just the beginning. You've seen advocates, you've seen researchers, myself, others, Tiara, others in the room on this podcast, and many others at the School of Public Health and Nursing and beyond, that have been chipping away to build the evidence base on who's impacted, what's the extent of the problem, the health impact, the economic impact, right? And also these solutions. What are these evidence-based solutions? However, this still remains an issue of myth oftentimes, and it unfortunately remains really a very hidden issue. It surprises a lot of people to know what the true economic burden of intimate partner violence actually is. Some of the recent estimates from CDC came out on this, and it actually found that this was in excess of about $3 trillion. Some of that is in medical costs, some of it is in lost productivity, some of it is in criminal justice activities, some of it is in victim property loss and damages and things like this. And so oftentimes people can only see one aspect of this, and it's because gender-based violence is so stigmatized, continues to be minimized and shamed. Employers, for example, do not always know when the reason for that lost productivity is an underlying issue of violence. We don't always see it in our financial institutes when we look at women's economic participation and their political participation. We see that violence, threats of violence, gender-based violence experiences are really eroding that economic participation. And so part of what is really important for us 30 years post-VAWA is to really name some of these hidden elements. It continues to surprise me that, for example, people sometimes are still relying on police records. And, Tiara and I are saying, look, that is just the tip of the iceberg. There is a much bigger underlying problem on this that we are actively working to articulate, describe, and communicate to others. And so I just really invite everyone on our listeners for the pod here to really start to see this hidden burden of gender-based violence. In seeing that hidden burden, we will find and advance those solutions. And that's a big part of the work that Tiara's been doing with Missing and Murdered. And it is a big part of the work that we're doing, again, with housing.
Tiara, I wanted to give you the last word here.
I think this is a really fantastic opportunity for us to talk about how do we look forward for the next 30 years with VAWA. I'm speaking that into existence. We're going to have another 30 years. And how can we continue to keep refining these solutions to address what Michele's been talking about, naming the problems explicitly and being able to take that public health perspective to address those unique issues so that we can continue to actually reduce incidence and prevalence of gender-based violence, that we can actually reduce the number of missing and murdered Black women and girls that have gone, from their families over all of these years. So I think we're hopeful that there's really opportunity for growth moving forward.
Michele Decker and Tiara Willie, thank you both so much for joining me.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Public Health on Call is a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, produced by Joshua Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith-Rogers, Stephanie Desmond, and Grace Fernandez-Cesiri. Audio production by J.B. Arbogast, Holly Cardinale, Spencer Greer, Matthew Martin, and Philip Porter, with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Production management by Catherine Ricardo. Social media run by Grace Fernandez-Cesiri. Analytics by Eliza Rosen. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send us an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes. Thank you for listening.